You don't have a family either? A little girl invited a lonely CEO to her birthday. He came alone, but left with a new family. He was known as Damon Keller, 54 years old, a man with silver-streaked hair, always dressed in sharp black suits, his eyes hidden behind tinted glasses that rarely revealed emotion. As CEO of a tech empire headquartered in a sprawling skyscraper in New Avalon City, Damon had built an empire from scratch. Yet, despite his luxurious penthouse, private jet, and worldwide recognition, Damon Keller lived in a kind of solitude that wealth could never shield him from. He lived alone in a minimalist high-rise, ate gourmet meals prepared by a rotating staff, and never received visitors. His parents were long gone. He had no siblings, no children, no partner. His phone buzzed non-stop with board meetings and investor calls, but never with a message that mattered. On a crisp autumn evening, Damon sat alone on a park bench, surrounded by rustling golden leaves and the faint laughter of families enjoying twilight. With a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, he scrolled mindlessly through news headlines. To those passing by, he looked dignified and confident. But inside, Damon felt like a ghost in his own life. Damon barely looked up as children ran past him, squealing with joy. He was about to return to his condo when a sudden burst of laughter made him glance sideways. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, with curly auburn hair, bright green eyes, and caramel-colored skin, stood just a few feet away from him. She wore a bright yellow puffer jacket and pink boots, holding a balloon shaped like a unicorn. Her smile was wide and her cheeks were flushed from play. "Hi," she chirped, her voice as unfiltered and sincere as the wind that stirred her curls. Damon blinked. "Hello," he said stiffly, unsure how to respond to a child in the middle of a city park. She tilted her head and looked at him curiously. "Are you alone?" Damon hesitated. "Yes, I am." She furrowed her brow, thoughtful. "You don't have a family too?" The question sliced deeper than she could have known. Damon opened his mouth to respond but said nothing. The girl's mother, a tall woman with braids and a warm presence, called, "Amari, come back, honey," but Amari stayed put. Damon wasn't used to people, especially children, looking at him without expectation or calculation. Amari clutched her balloon and looked up at him as if waiting for something. "You should come to my birthday," she said suddenly. "It's tomorrow. I'll be 6.5, he blinked, startled. "Your birthday?" "Yep," she beamed. "It's at our house. Mama says I can invite anyone I want, and I want to invite you." "Me?" Damon chuckled softly, a sound that felt foreign even to him. "Why not?" she shrugged. "You look like you need cake." Before he could respond, her mother approached, a bit wary but smiling gently. "I hope she's not bothering you." "Not at all," Damon said quietly. "She's kind," the woman nodded. "She's got a big heart." Then, turning to her daughter, she added, "Let's get going, sweetie." "Will you come?" Amari asked one last time as they began to walk away. Damon didn't answer immediately. He just nodded slightly, the corner of his mouth curling upward in the faintest hint of a smile. Back in his penthouse, Damon Keller stood in front of his walk-in closet, staring at a wall of identical dark suits. He wasn't sure why he even considered attending. He could have dismissed the entire moment as an odd city encounter, but something about the girl's genuine warmth haunted him. In a good way, he pulled out a navy sweater he hadn't worn in years, a pair of jeans he wasn't sure still fit, and shoes that weren't polished leather. Looking at himself in the mirror, Damon barely recognized the man in casual clothes. He looked human. He ordered a gift, a deluxe art set for children, wrapped it himself, clumsily. The next morning he hesitated outside his front door before finally stepping out. The car ride across town felt longer than any flight he'd taken for business. He clutched the gift like it was a business report he had to present to shareholders. When he finally reached the modest, colorful townhouse, he paused at the gate. Laughter spilled out from the backyard. Balloons bounced in the wind. Music played, something cheerful and silly. Damon took a breath, stepped inside, and walked toward a new chapter. The moment Damon walked through the backyard gate, the scene hit him like a wave. Tables covered in colorful cloths, paper plates stacked high with pizza, kids chasing bubbles, parents chatting with cups of lemonade in hand. The smell of grilled hot dogs filled the air. It was chaos, but the good kind. He stood still for a moment, unnoticed. Then Amari saw him. Her face lit up as if a cartoon sun had burst behind her. "You came." She reached over and threw her arms around his waist. Damon stiffened, unused to hugs. Then slowly he patted her back, a smile pulling at his lips. "You're just in time for cake," she announced. Amari's mother came over, surprised but gracious. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "I wasn't either," Damon admitted. She nodded. "I'm Elise." "Damon," he replied. He was guided to a seat, given a plate, introduced to cousins, uncles, neighbors. Everyone seemed to accept him without question, as if he belonged there. For the first time in years, Damon didn't feel like a CEO or a stranger. He felt like a guest, wanted, welcomed, human. Damon sat quietly at the long folding table covered in paper streamers and cartoon unicorns. Children tugged at his sleeves, asking him to join a game of tag. At first he shook his head with an awkward smile. But Amari insisted, grabbing his hand with complete trust. Soon Damon was actually running, on the grass, dodging balloons and shrieking with laughter. It was clumsy, slow, and entirely ungraceful, but the children didn't care. They screamed in delight as the man in jeans gave chase like a gentle giant. His laughter surprised him. He hadn't laughed like that in decades, if ever. Adults watched with smiles, nudging each other and whispering in amusement. They didn't recognize him as someone important or wealthy. They simply saw a man allowing himself to be free. Damon noticed a change within himself. For so long he had lived life on a script. Meetings, emails, markets, mergers. But here, surrounded by children's laughter and unfiltered joy, he began to feel something break loose in his chest. A weight he didn't know he carried. By the time the game ended he was breathless, sweating slightly and grinning from ear to ear. It wasn't just fun, it was freedom. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Elise brought out a cake with bright blue icing, glittery candles, and Amari's name scrawled in pink frosting. Everyone gathered around, clapping and singing as Amari closed her eyes to make a wish. Damon stood quietly behind the group, his heart beating strangely fast. The scene unfolded like something from a dream. Children dancing, parents humming along, and the little girl who had spoken to him without judgment now blowing out candles in pure delight. When the cake was cut and slices handed around, Amari made a beeline toward him. "You get the first piece," she announced, handing him a paper plate with sticky icing. He accepted it, unsure how to express the lump rising in his throat. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. She leaned in close and whispered, "Did you have a birthday party when you were little?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not like this." Amari looked up at him with a wise seriousness far beyond her years. "Then this one is yours too." Damon couldn't answer. He simply turned away for a moment, wiping a tear he hadn't expected. It wasn't just cake, it was healing. After the cake and singing, the mood settled into a gentle hum of conversation. Elise came to sit beside Damon, 2 cups of lemonade in her hands. She passed one to him with a smile. "So, who are you really?" Damon chuckled softly. "I'm just someone who's forgotten what it means to be around people." She raised an eyebrow. "You're more than that. I've seen the way Amari looks at you. You've made an impression." Damon nodded slowly. "I run a company, I have money, power, but none of it feels real when I go home at night." Elise studied him. "And today, did this feel real?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around at the yard filled with the people he'd only just met. "More real than anything I've felt in years." There was a long pause between them. Not awkward, just quiet. Damon wasn't used to vulnerability, but he didn't resist it. "Not here." "I think your daughter gave me a gift today I didn't know I needed," he finally said. "She does that," Elise replied. "She sees people." And in that moment Damon realized so few had truly seen him for who he was beneath the suits and success. As the party wound down and parents began collecting their children, Damon found himself lingering. No one rushed him to leave. No one made him feel out of place. He was simply part of it all. Amari sat on the grass, playing with her new art set, his gift. Her fingers were already stained with paint, her tongue poking out in concentration. When she noticed him watching, she waved him over excitedly. "Look, I'm painting you." He knelt beside her, astonished. She held up a page with clumsy strokes of blue and black, a tall man with a kind smile standing under a rainbow. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Damon smiled. "That's me, yep, and you're happy." He looked at the image and nodded. "You're right, I am." She leaned her head against his arm and whispered, "Now you're not alone anymore." He wrapped an arm around her tiny shoulders, feeling the fragile weight of her trust. For years he had operated in isolation, believing no one could reach the quiet places inside him. But here, under a paper lantern sky, surrounded by love and simplicity, he had found something no boardroom could ever offer: belonging. When Damon finally stood to leave, the sky was streaked with the last colors of sunset. He shook hands with a few parents, thanked Elise for her hospitality, and promised Amari he would visit again. As he walked back through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, gift bag in one hand and a crumpled drawing in the other, he felt a fullness in his chest he couldn't name. This had started with a simple question from a child. "You don't have a family too?" And now, hours later, that same child had painted him into her world, as someone who belonged, someone who smiled. He reached his penthouse later that night, but it no longer felt like the top of the world. It felt empty, sterile. For the first time, Damon Keller looked around and saw what he had built and what was missing. He placed Amari's drawing on the kitchen counter. A rainbow, a man, and a smile. And he realized, maybe that was the beginning of a new life, one with people, one with meaning. Damon Keller stood at the window of his lavish penthouse, staring down at the glittering city below. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view, one he used to find exhilarating. Now it felt hollow. The echo of silence filled the space, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant whir of city traffic. He placed Amari's crayon drawing on the kitchen counter. The tall man with the smile under a rainbow stared back at him. The simplicity of it struck a deep chord. His home was pristine, too pristine. Designer furniture sat untouched, shelves lined with books he hadn't read in years, art pieces worth a fortune but devoid of warmth. There were no framed photos, no mess, no signs of life. He poured himself a glass of water and sat at the long dining table, where no one had ever shared a meal with him. For the first time, he truly saw the cost of his solitude, not as a noble sacrifice for success, but as a wound he'd refused to acknowledge. And for the first time in his life, Damon didn't want to be alone anymore. He picked up his phone and began scrolling, not through business contacts, but through old texts from people he'd ignored for years. Damon hesitated over a name, his old college friend Luis. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. The last time had been a short, awkward conversation after Luis's father passed away. Damon had meant to reach out again, he never did. With a trembling finger he pressed the call button. "Hello," came a surprised voice on the other end. "Luis, it's Damon. Damon Keller." There was a pause. Then, "Damon, wow, this is unexpected." "I know, I'm sorry it's been so long." Luis was cautious at first, clearly unsure of the purpose behind the call. But Damon kept the conversation light. No talk of business or investments, just small stories, mutual memories, a genuine apology. "I went to a kid's birthday party today," Damon said suddenly. Luis laughed. "You, a birthday party? That's hard to picture." "Yeah, for a girl named Amari. She invited me, just like that, out of nowhere." There was another pause. "Sounds like she made an impression." "She did," Damon admitted. "She reminded me what it's like to feel human." That night they talked for over an hour. When the call ended, Damon felt a strange peace. Reconnection, even in small doses, had begun to stitch something back together inside him. The next morning, sunlight poured through the penthouse windows. Damon didn't rush to check emails or review the market. Instead, he sat at the small breakfast table with a bowl of oatmeal he made himself, clumsily but with intention. As he ate, he looked at the drawing Amari had given him, now framed in a simple black border. It sat proudly on the counter. He had chosen to frame it late last night, a small but meaningful act. He opened a leather notebook he had bought years ago and never used. On the first page he wrote, "Things that matter. Laughter in the park, Amari's drawing, honest conversations, being invited, saying yes." It was the beginning of a new kind of list. Not one filled with quarterly goals or profit projections, but with reminders of what made life feel worthwhile. Then he made another decision. He would return to that neighborhood. Not to buy anything or expand a business, but simply to be present. He wanted to show Amari and Elise that their kindness had not been a momentary blip in his day. It had become a turning point. A few days later, Damon found himself walking down the same street where Amari's birthday had taken place. It was late afternoon, the air filled with the scent of freshly baked bread from a corner bakery. Children played jump rope near the sidewalk and a street vendor sold roasted peanuts from a cart. He carried a small paper bag of pastries and a thank you note in his coat pocket. When he reached the townhouse, Elise was outside watering the front garden. She looked up and smiled, surprised but not shocked. "Mr. Keller." "Damon," he corrected with a genuine grin. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she said, setting the watering can down. "Amari's inside painting again." He handed her the pastries and note. "A small thank you. For that day. For your kindness." Elise opened the note and read it quietly. Her eyes welled slightly and she nodded without speaking. "Would it be all right if I visited now and then?" Damon asked softly. "No pressure, just, it's something I'd really like." Elise smiled. "You're always welcome." And just like that, Damon Keller, once a ghost among people, began to feel like a neighbor. Weeks passed. Damon's visits became regular. Sometimes he'd bring board games or books for Amari. Other times, he and Elise would talk over coffee while Amari painted or danced in the living room. Damon learned how to listen, not to reports or proposals, but to stories, to jokes, to the rhythms of daily life. He began to laugh more often, and not just politely, genuinely. One day, during a staff meeting at his company's headquarters, he surprised his team by cutting the session short. "Why?" his assistant asked as they left the boardroom. "I have somewhere to be," Damon said. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. He was beginning to protect his time differently. Meetings would always be there, but birthday parties, spontaneous conversations, and quiet coffee chats, those were the moments that made a life feel full. He started encouraging his employees to take family days, listen more actively, even reduce unnecessary after-hours communication. Slowly, his company culture began to shift, not just more humane, but more connected. And all of it, every subtle change, had started with the voice of a 6-year-old who asked a simple, unguarded question: "You don't have a family too?" Months passed, and Damon Keller's transformation wasn't only internal, it was visible to anyone who had known him before. The once stern-faced executive who moved through life like a machine now greeted employees by name, smiled freely, and even cracked jokes during morning briefings. He stopped wearing dark suits every day. Sometimes he showed up in simple sweaters and walking shoes. People whispered at first, unsure of the change, but over time, respect grew, not out of fear but admiration. One afternoon during a company town hall, Damon shared something he never would have shared a year ago. "I used to think success meant isolation, that leadership was about staying separate, above it all. But someone very small and very wise reminded me that life isn't about building walls, it's about opening doors." The room fell silent. "I went to a little girl's birthday party," he continued, smiling gently, "and I left that day with something more valuable than any stock or investment: belonging. It wasn't part of a planned speech, it was just truth, raw, honest, and real. And in that moment, Damon Keller wasn't just a CEO, he was a man learning to be human again, and giving others permission to do the same." One Saturday morning, Damon received a message from Elise. "It's school picture day on Monday. Amari wants to show you her dress, can you come by?" He smiled as he read it. There was no formal request, no pretense, just a normal moment of shared life. That alone meant the world. Later that afternoon, he arrived at their townhouse and knocked on the door. Amari answered, twirling in a blue and white polka-dotted dress with lace trim. "Do I look like a princess?" she asked. "You look better," Damon replied warmly. "You look like yourself." "And that's perfect," Amari grinned and held up a hand-drawn sign, "Picture Day Advisor, Damon." He laughed, touched to the core. He helped fix a stray bow in her hair and gave a thumbs up for every pose she practiced. Elise watched from the kitchen, shaking her head with amusement. "You've become part of the routine now," she said. Damon smiled. "I like it here, it feels like home." He didn't say it lightly, and he wasn't just referring to the house, he was talking about connection, about trust, about the small rituals that make ordinary life feel extraordinary. Spring arrived, painting the city in soft pastels. Parks bloomed with tulips and birdsong, and the city air grew gentler. Damon walked often now, without bodyguards or tinted windows. Just himself, a jacket slung over his shoulder and time to spare. He was even taking weekends off. One Saturday, while sitting in Elise's backyard with Amari and a few neighborhood kids, Elise handed him a mug of tea and sat beside him. "You've changed a lot," she said, her tone thoughtful. Damon nodded. "I've remembered who I was before I started chasing the world. I think I forgot for a long time." "You're good with the kids," she said. "Even when you're awkward," he laughed. "I'm still learning." She turned to him, serious now. "Why us, Damon? Why come back here again and again?" He looked toward the children, especially at Amari, now building a fort out of cushions. "Because this place reminds me what it feels like to be needed, not for what I have, but for who I am." It wasn't charity, it wasn't pity, it was gratitude, for being seen, for being let in, for being allowed to feel like he belonged to something greater than himself. Damon began supporting local programs, not through publicity or tax write-offs but quietly. He funded after-school arts initiatives, sponsored library books, and built a new community park in Amari's neighborhood. He didn't want plaques or photo ops. He wanted kids like Amari to keep dreaming, to keep painting, to keep believing their voices mattered. At one of the community events he helped fund, Amari was asked to present a short thank you speech. She stood on a little wooden stage in front of folding chairs and families. "I want to thank Mr. Damon," she said, her voice clear and bright. "Not just for the paint or the swings, but for coming to my birthday, even when he didn't know anyone." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "He came because I asked," she continued. "And that's how friends work. They show up." Damon swallowed hard, clapping along with the others, his heart swelling. This wasn't about being honored. It was about being part of something living, something growing. And in that moment, surrounded by smiles and laughter and simple truths, he knew that his life had found new purpose. A seed of change had been planted and now it was blooming. 1 year to the day since Amari first approached him on that park bench, Damon arrived again at the same townhouse, holding a new wrapped present under his arm. This time he didn't hesitate at the gate. He was no longer a stranger. As the party kicked off, familiar faces welcomed him. Amari ran into his arms, laughing. Elise gave him a knowing smile. Everything felt natural now, effortless. This time, Damon helped set up decorations, passed out cupcakes, played tag, and even joined a group dance led by the kids. He laughed loudly, unafraid. He stayed until the very end, And when the sun set and he walked back through the neighborhood streets, he felt no emptiness, only warmth. Amari's drawing still hung in his penthouse, but now there were others. Photos of moments, shared smiles, captured laughter. His once sterile world had transformed into a mosaic of memory and meaning, all because a little girl had seen something in him and decided to ask a question most adults would never dare. "You don't have a family too?" And in her voice, Damon Keller found his answer. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more inspiring tales of connection, kindness, and rediscovery. Let's keep sharing stories that remind us what truly matters.